From the Gunny Moto. Hey, I decided to start this YouTube channel because I know that there are a lot of folks that come to Gunnison and Crested Butte and Gunnison County to ride ATVs and motorcycles, and I thought maybe someone would benefit if they got a preview of what it might be like here. So I recently bought a dual sport motorcycle and started riding around Gunnison County, and a lot of my motivation was that I heard that there were over 3,000 miles of BLM roads and forest roads just in Gunnison County, not to mention all the surrounding counties around us. So Gunnison County is large, mountainous landscape, but what's unique about Gunnison County is that we kind of transition from BLM to forest in most of our terrain. And so you have a huge variety of roads that you can explore. The BLM roads, obviously fewer trees, a lot of sagebrush and big majestic views, just miles and miles and miles of kind of high alpine desert type landscape. And then as you go higher in elevation, you quickly hit the forests, and the forest roads are what they would sound like. Now you're in the trees and you're getting into that alpine and subalpine and montane mountain landscape that can be so beautiful. As far as riding difficulty goes, I primarily am touring. So if you want to see, you know, Red Bull championship style riding, this is probably not the channel for you. Instead, I got my motorcycle because I wanted to see the place where I live. And with 3,000 plus miles to explore, and that's just twin track, then I thought maybe I needed something a little bit faster than my mountain bike. Now, as far as mountain biking goes, absolutely love mountain biking too. But there are over 750 miles of single track mountain biking terrain. I personally saved the single track for the mountain bikes, and I love mountain biking. And I go on the forest roads and BLM roads where you don't see many bikes and they're not crowded here. So lots of amazing mountain scenery. A couple of things about Gunnison that you may not know. We're at 7,700 feet in elevation, and that's where you start. You climb from there. So every ride can go very high, and you have to be ready for mountain weather and conditions. So, you know, you're starting at 7,700 and going up, you can easily get over 12,000 feet, maybe even 13,000 feet on a motorcycle around here. So when I decided to start riding a motorcycle, I wanted something that was affordable, and regretfully, COVID created a lot of shortages. And, you know, the public health orders created all the supply chain problems. And because there are fewer new motorcycles available, a lot of people started buying used motorcycles, and the demand went up, the prices went up. So I ended up buying an 18-year-old DRZ 400 Suzuki. And it is the E version, but street legal, and it's 18 years old because that's what was available, also because that's what was in my price range. So anyway, I probably paid $1,000 or $1,500 more than I would have had I bought that prior to all the supply chain disruptions. But hey, that's life. I'm glad to have it. I'll show you the bike, and then I'm going to gear up and take you on a ride. Okay, here it is, the 18-year-old Suzuki DRZ 400 that I'm on. New tires. I have been tearing into the carburetor, and I don't know how to do carburetors, so that's always the interesting part. Been working on the carburetor, probably had it out of that bike 5 times already, but I think I finally have it dialed in pretty well. On the back, I put a place to carry some tools, and on the front, there's an extra 32 ounces of gasoline. This motorcycle has a range of only about 90 miles with a stock tank. They do make a desert tank for it, and I'm thinking about investing in one. But 90 miles is not very far in Gunnison County. You could easily cover 90 miles between gas stations. And part of that's because you don't have gas stations on every corner. Matter of fact, you don't have corners. We're talking about big, open mountain landscapes. So anyway, I'm going to take you on a ride on the 18-year-old DRZ, and it's kind of become a project for me to get this bike dialed in where we can have a lot of fun. I think a little explanation is due here. I didn't have my audio worked out on the GoPro yet because this was my first time to ever use a GoPro and first time on the motorcycle. So it's really hard to hear what I'm trying to share. But in most of the videos going forward, you'll be able to hear me talking about stuff as we pass by. So today there's going to be a mix of that, which will be difficult to hear, but there are some places where you can make it out. And then I'm doing a voiceover so that maybe you'll be able to have something interesting to hear about this ride. So I started there on the frontage road to Highway 135, which is just north of town, and then this is Lost Canyon Road. And I'm headed generally north at this point. And I'm skipping a lot of this part because, frankly, it's just not super interesting. But the Lost Canyon Road here winds its way from Gunnison at 7,700 feet all the way up to over 10,000 feet in the National Forest. And here's the Lost Canyon part. It's kind of a neat area. I like it when, just there's a little bit of topography, some cliffs to look at, a few things like that. And as you get up higher, you get some amazing views to the north, all the way into Crested Butte on the one hand, and then toward Mount Carbon and the Anthracites on the other. There's some little side roads that peel off of this, and by the way, I'm on BLM road now, so out of the county roads onto BLM roads. But there's some side roads that peel off here that make some loops and go to different places where people camp or work with cattle or park for riding horses or whatever it may be. And some of these side roads get pretty crazy. You either need to have stock vehicles, passenger vehicles aren't going to make it, but a 4x4 could make it on these roads. But this road, as you can see, a passenger vehicle could enjoy, and it is open range, obviously. Now, something about the Aspen. As you see, we're starting to get into the trees here, so we have made it into the National Forest from the BLM. And as you see, some of the aspen are bare already. The aspen were a little past their prime. Now, it's interesting. The aspen used to hit their prime, meaning all the leaves are golden or maybe a little green left, but they're still on the trees. Seems like that used to be the middle of September toward the maybe third week of September. This is actually the second weekend in October that I'm doing this ride. So it seems like it's shifted out now. The peak, I think, was the first weekend in October this year and last year as well. So not sure why it shifted out. It has a lot to do with how cold it gets at night, I believe. Something to do with how much rain there's been. And not sure what triggers the aspen to change. But it has been shifting over the year, and every season is actually different. So if you want to catch the aspen in their prime, it's a little bit of guesswork is required. So the road that I'm on here is Forest Road 743. And this is almost the top. So we're over 10,000 feet now. And this is where I turn off just in a second here. We've got a road to the right. And a road to the left. And the main road goes left. You can go that way all the way to Almont. I like going to the right, and I don't know if you can see through the aspen trunks, but there's some more mountains and a deep valley ahead of us. That's our destination. We're going in there. So we're actually going to be going close to the wilderness boundary of Fossil Ridge. Hello, cows. So really, this is where the ride gets fun. At this point, you need a 4x4 with good ground clearance for this road. And, GoPros flatten everything, so you can't tell really how steep it is or the size of the rocks. It's moderately steep here, not horrible. It gets a lot steeper later. But the rocks are large they're large enough that even a stock 4x4 can easily high center on some of these rocks. My streets are paved with gold. I just love this season. It's so fun to see the beautiful leaves. You gotta pick your way pretty carefully, and you get all beat up. Okay, we're filming again. Had to stop and change a battery already. We're about 14 miles in so far in the forest. So I guess the question is... Okay, back to that. What is the right vehicle for exploring these mountain roads like this in Colorado? And a lot of these roads can be explored easily with a 4x4 vehicle. You have to have good clearance as a rule once you get on forest roads because they're just so bony. There's some big rocks. It seems like every time there's a little bit of slope, the soil washed away and you're left with a rock garden to get through. You notice here there's also some puddles, a fair bit of mud, and you know that it's the mud that is actually the nemesis of the motorcycle. That's where I think the ATVs kind of have a slight advantage, that you know they have four wheels and they don't slip and fall over. But I think in every other condition that I can think of, the motorcycle probably is the better vehicle for exploring these roads. I mean, for instance, you can move along at just about any clip you want to on a motorcycle. And if you're in just a stock 4x4, then you're going to be crawling through here. You see these erosion control humps and large rocks. It's just, you know, you're going to be going 2, maybe 3 miles an hour through here. On a motorcycle, you can go 20 as fast as you feel comfortable. On an ATV, you do have to go quite a bit slower than a motorcycle. They can't handle the high speed, but they are faster than the 4x4. I think the other advantage to the ATV over just a standard 4x4 vehicle is that they're more open. And of course, that means more dust, more mud, more cold, more rain, but that's part of the experience that I like so much. So I have a friend here in town, great guy, and he ran the emergency room at the local hospital for a while, and I was asking him about what kind of injuries end up in that emergency room. And he was saying that, you know, you got your standard stuff, you know, that would happen with people catching the flu and what have you. But in this area, he said it seems like it's the ATVs that are creating the most injuries. And from that, I'm guessing it's less the side-by-sides, you know, the Polaris vehicles like that, and it's more the 4x4s. And if you're on a three-wheeler, forget it. Or get rid of it. Three-wheelers, you know, they were popular about 40 years ago, but so many people got hurt because they ended up rolling on top of people. But he said that what was happening a lot, especially it seems like it comes out of Taylor Park, which is kind of northeastern part of Gunnison County. People go there to ride, and the ATVs are just very big, heavy, powerful machines. And people think because they have four wheels that they know how to manage an ATV because it's car-like. And as you can see, we're getting into some large rocks here. They'll knock the bottom out of any vehicle that doesn't have pretty high clearance. Even some 4x4s are going to hit in those places. Well, it turns out that these ATVs take a lot more practice to really get good at because they're tippy. They roll easily, and when they do, they're heavy. And you can also, with the balloon tires, you know, you can start bouncing on washboard on the road if you're going a little bit too fast. Next thing you know, you're sideways to the road and flying off a bluff. Regardless, he said that the biggest injuries that they generally saw in Gunnison were from ATVs because they're just so heavy and they throw people, they roll over people. He says when someone comes in and we find out they were in an ATV accident, he says it's most generally flight for life into a bigger hospital because they're going to need internal surgery because their insides have been smashed up and they're likely bleeding on the inside. So that was surprising to me. I asked him about motorcycles. He goes, no, not so much. He said that the motorcycle accidents, maybe you got a broken collarbone or a broken arm or, maybe a broken leg. But the motorcycles being lighter don't generally cause as severe of injuries if you have a problem. And I thought that was really interesting. You see all the water on this trail? That's because we've had a fair deal of rain this fall, and that's really good. We needed the moisture. The trail sometimes is dry, but it does hold water, obviously, and you have to be prepared for a little bit of mud. Now, motorcycles, I think, are the fastest way to travel these kind of off-road scenarios. And obviously I'm on a road, but, OHV type terrain. And the reason is because you can choose your line. They have just so much travel in the suspension. You don't get beat up nearly as much as you would in a four-wheel vehicle. In a four-wheel vehicle, you're rocking back and forth. Every time you hit a bump, and it can be jarring and tiresome. But on a motorcycle, you bounce around a little bit, but it's just a lot smoother ride, and you can go so much faster. So motorcycles are the fastest way to explore these mountain roads. They are safer in some regards than ATVs. But one difference is that motorcycles really do require a skill set that you learn over years and years of riding. And I started riding motorcycles at the age of about 10, maybe 12. And I think I bought my first motorcycle when I was 12. I had ridden just a little bit before that, just kind of learning how. And then I bought a motorcycle and mowed lawns to pay for it. But back then, I was riding in the hayfields and on the cattle trails and on dirt roads. Nothing as technical as this. But I never really rode on pavement. And I think something that I learned, it's kind of funny, I learned in reverse. A lot of other people find out as well, and this is a word of caution. If you are a motorcycle enthusiast and you've been riding on the asphalt, then when you jump onto roads like this, you might get a wake-up call. This is a different type of riding entirely, and obviously, you're not going to do this on a street bike. They're just not made. They don't have the travel nor the right tires for this, and they're just too heavy and awkward. But on an adventure bike, now you could enjoy this road, but there are many roads in Gunnison County that the adventure bike just isn't going to handle either. I mean, you might, if you're really, really skilled, put the right aggressive tires on an adventure bike and expand the area that you can go to quite a bit. But this is why I'm on a dual sport, because the dual sport is a lighter bike, much more agile, more travel. It just eats the bumps. You put good knobby tires on this, and really there's nothing in Gunnison you can't do if your skill set's high enough. So here's the story. A buddy and I decided to rent some adventure bikes and go on a highway ride. And I didn't tell him I'd never been on the asphalt before. I really hadn't. Hardly ever been on the asphalt. And so we rented these bikes and we took off up I-70. Now here I paused the motorcycle just so you could take in the views. See the deer tracks there. Could have been elk. I didn't take time to look at the size. Kind of looked like they are elk. It's almost hunting season. Matter of fact, it's bow season during this ride. But rifle season was a couple of weeks out still. Hunting is huge in Gunnison County. Lots and lots of people come here for the deer and the elk, bighorn sheep, mountain lions, bear. It's all here. And so in the fall, beware. If you decide to go out and start riding these roads, then I would say you're going to have to contend with the hunters. But I think the reality is the hunters are going to have to contend with you because you're the one that's making the racket and hopefully not messing up their hunt. But just keep in mind that in the fall during hunting season, then that is a thing. And if you're going to be out hiking or something in the fall, then make sure you're wearing some bright colors. Even if you're not hunting, you don't want to be mistaken for, for some critter crawling through the underbrush. Instead, you want to make sure you have on your hunter orange. So anyway, we jumped on to I-70, and we were going about 70 miles an hour. It was a 75 mile an hour speed limit, I believe. I had never been above 45 miles an hour in my life, and never on a big bike. And I was so surprised at the way the bike handled on the asphalt, how much wind there is, and I had a dual sport helmet on with a visor, so I turned my head to check a lane next to me and about ripped my head off. I had no idea of any of that. And that day, I would say, was the day that I learned even how to corner on asphalt. And it is different. Same rules kind of apply, but I was accustomed to having some slippage under the tires. And cornering around the asphalt, it's like the tires are glued down. It was a strange sensation for me. So I had a real wake-up call. And I'll admit, I'm not very skilled at riding on the pavement. So in reverse is what usually happens. I think most people these days ride motorcycles quite a bit on the asphalt, and they get pretty good at it. But then they jump on a road like this, I think often they're in for a surprise. Completely different type of riding. So the question is, how much experience do you need before you can jump on a decent-sized motorcycle and take off on these roads? And, obviously you'll learn as you go, but I would say if you're on a lighter motorcycle that's not quite so torquey, then if you know how to manage a motorcycle on the asphalt, that would be a good way to start riding this stuff. My DRZ 400 is not the biggest bike, not the most powerful bike, but it has plenty of power. I call it an all-you-can-eat motorcycle. It's going to have more power than you need for this type of riding, and so you can get yourself in trouble with it. It's a 300-pound bike, and it has enough torque. You're going to get up to 30, 35 miles an hour in first gear. And that really is the difference between, I think, a smaller displacement engine versus a bigger one. It's how much speed you get in a single gear. And the reason that matters is because beginner riders often get into the throttle. Oh, look at this view. The Aspen up that valley. By the way, that's Fossil Ridge, and that's a wilderness area. I'll come back to that in just a minute. But they get into the throttle and it scares them, and then they tense up and the throttle goes even higher, and then next thing you know, the motorcycle's shooting out from under them or taking them on a ride that they didn't want. It's just a natural kind of a thing to do, to tense up and increase the throttle by accident. Seems like to be the number one way that people get hurt when they first start riding motorcycles. So that's why I kind of like a smaller CC, smaller displacement, lighter weight motorcycle for beginners. Not so much power. You're not going to go quite so fast in a single gear. If you make a mistake, then hopefully the outcome will be a little less severe. On this DRZ, if you do that, it's a big bike, and it can really throw you. It can throw you hard. So I would not call this necessarily an entry-level motorcycle, but if you're already really good at riding on the streets, then it might be a good level motorcycle for you for riding in this kind of stuff. Now let's talk about Fossil Ridge just a little bit. It's kind of crazy to think about, but the name for Fossil Ridge, wilderness, is because of those mountains that you saw in the background there. Hello, cows. Up on top of that mountain, over 12,000 feet, there are fossils, marine fossils. That was a seabed at one point. And it's kind of crazy to think that what was once under an ocean is now 12,000 feet above sea level. But there's the proof of it right there. This area went through a lot of geological epochs, and I couldn't begin to list them all or even begin to talk about how long ago it was. and what happened exactly, but I've heard that this current Rocky Mountain Range is the third mountain range that's been in this area, and it's also, now you may notice this is a fairly steep and bony hill. I'm going to talk about that in a minute too. But also, it's the third mountain range that was here, but we also had inland seas here as well, and connected to the oceans. So it's pretty wild to think about how plate tectonics and seismology and volcanism and all that kind of stuff can so change a landscape. But anyway, Fossil Ridge is named after the fossils at 12,000 feet that used to be in the seabed. I really like this part of this ride. The first part of the ride, you notice, was fairly steep and bony and muddy. But as we get into this part, then there's some really steep places, but the roads are more crushed granite, so it's more sandy than it is muddy. And on this part of the ride, you get the really big views, especially to the mountains to the west and to the north. And I really enjoy that. But, like I said, the GoPro flattens everything. So, how steep is steep? That wasn't the steepest hill back there. That was pretty rough, but it was steep. We're going to get to some steeper hills here in a little bit, and they're steep enough that the back end of the motorcycle is fishtailing all over the place because the tire is spinning just to try to go up it. So it's not quite, hill climbing, cliff climbing steep, but it is steep enough that you need to have your skill to get up it, for sure. So these mountains on the left, I don't even know what their name is, but a week before this, they were just lit up with so many beautiful aspen. And obviously, there's still some color, but the week prior to this, it was so beautiful. This is one of my favorite rides. I'll do this ride on this motorcycle. It takes about an hour and a half to do this ride. In a 4x4, you're going to be probably closer to 3 hours to do this ride. In an ATV, maybe 2 hours and 15 minutes, something like that. But I can do this ride in an hour and a half from the house, and I just enjoy the scenery and the riding so much. So I do it from time to time just when I want to do a little ride and enjoy getting out there. Come on, cows. That was a muddy spot. I don't know, if you're not familiar with cattle, they're not tame, but neither are they wild. As you can see, they don't know what to do with you when you come by. But once when I was a kid, I had a little Volkswagen Beetle when I was 16, and I had to go through open range every day on the way to school. And one day, there were 2 massive bulls that decided they were going to spar in the road in front of me. And I nudged up, close to them, hoping that they would move on out of the way, because that's generally what you do. You get a little close, they step off the road, right? These guys were too preoccupied with seeing who was the bigger bull to pay any attention to me. And when I say big, these guys were massive. They were the ones that are probably 2,000 pounds. Not kidding. They were that big. And they had their heads and their horns locked together. And all of a sudden, the bull on the other side started winning the push. And they started stumbling, or the one in the back toward me started stumbling backwards. And he was headed right for the hood of my car. And, of course, he would trip over my bumper and sit down and just destroy my Volkswagen Beetle. So I was looking for reverse, which on a Volkswagen can be tricky to find. I was looking for reverse and trying to get back and rooting for that bull on my side to win. And he actually did start to hold his ground just before he sat down on the hood of my car. So when it comes to big bulls that are distracted, you have to practice a little bit more caution. Don't assume that they're just going to run away. They might not. Now in this video, I didn't want it to get too terribly long, and I've split this ride into 2 episodes. So the first part of the ride, you got to see the more bony parts, the steeper parts, and how to get here. And in the second part of the ride, you're going to see the more sandy parts and the big mountain views. So if you want to see the rest of the ride, go to episode 2, and it'll be fun as well. It's not really more of the same. It does change. It does change. Boy, I just love the Aspen. The sun shines through them like that, and they're so golden and beautiful. And I know that in the Appalachians or the Smokies or even in the Ozarks, you get a big variety of trees that have all sorts of different colors, including the maples that can be so golden red and orange and even purple. It's very, very beautiful. But here, it's primarily just yellow aspen. By the way, this section right here is so steep that you pretty much have to roll it. I don't think it would be easy to stop here because you just skid when you hit the brakes. And so you have to just brake a little bit and generally roll it down. I don't know if that gives you any indication on how steep it is. You know, when I was a kid, when I first bought that motorcycle, I said that I mowed lawns to pay for it. And so I had saved up my money and bought the bike, but I wanted to replace the money that I took out of savings. And so I decided to mow lawns for my uncle. And he lived down a bunch of dirt roads, probably 6 miles away from where I lived. And I was going to ride my motorcycle to his house, mow his lawn, and he agreed to pay me $12 to mow his lawn. Now, you might think $12 is not much, but it's even worse. He had a 3-acre lawn that was full of vineyards, ponds, creeks, stumps, rocks, and an orchard. And so mowing that lawn was exhausting with a hand mower. It took me 2 full days to mow that lawn for $12. And then I would go home, and our lawn wasn't quite as big. It was about an acre, acre and a half, and I'd have to mow that lawn. So I spent most of my time pushing a lawnmower, and as you might have guessed, I'm not a fan of mowing lawns anymore. It's just not my thing. But the reason that I bring it up is because I remember the first day riding my motorcycle to my uncle's house, and I was not a skilled rider at all yet. And I came to a hill it was in northeastern Oklahoma, where the Ozarks spill into the state, and they call them flint ridges. Flint rock, extremely steep. And they had built a county road that just went straight up this crazy hill, and then there were a bunch of rocks that stuck up out of it. Now, it wasn't as bad as what I'm on here, obviously, but man, as a 12-year-old kid that really didn't know how to ride, I remember I stopped at the bottom of that hill, and I was like, I don't even know if the motorcycle will make it up it. I sat there for the longest, and I finally put it in first gear and popped the clutch. Probably had to try starting 2 or 3 times. Got going up that hill and just kept going. And I didn't want to go too fast, but I didn't want to slow down. So I just remember how much fun it was to find out what a motorcycle could do and how going up steep stuff can be a thrill when you're first learning to ride. Well, this road, again, which is 586, Forest Road 586, it's northeast of Gunnison. You go up Lost Canyon to get here. This road has some steep stuff, and it has some high rocks, and it's fairly rough. It's not as rough as a lot of forest roads, but it's fairly rough. So you need at least a high clearance vehicle and some patience for this road. But on a motorcycle, it's not super technical, and it's just a joy to ride. So you can see that here we're kind of in a mix of sagebrush and forest with aspen and spruce, different types of pines mixed in. A lot of Gunnison country is like this. It's kind of a mix where the two little ecosystems kind of come together and transition. And it makes for, I think, a beautiful landscape. You can get into the deep forests. You can also get into just open sagebrush. But both, oh, here's a steep hill. Honestly, that hill is steep enough that if you're a beginner rider, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but you're going to learn a lot trying. I guarantee you that. The back end of the motorcycle was fishtailing around there. Well, guys, we're coming to the end of this video. There's about a minute and a half left. And I pause up here on the ride to kind of show you the view. And this is a high place, so you can see quite a bit more. But I hope that you've enjoyed this little preview of this road. And for you 4x4 enthusiasts, you can tell it's not that hard. For you motorcycle enthusiasts, this is probably about as hard as you're going to want to do on an adventure bike, and don't bring a street bike on this. But for you trail riders, this is not very hard on a dual sport motorcycle or any sort of a dirt bike. It's really not that hard, so it makes for an enjoyable ride with just enough challenge to be interesting, but nothing that is super challenging. But just getting out here, seeing the sights, the views, smelling the sagebrush and the pine trees. So here you go, guys. Episode 1 of Gunny Moto. It's going to be something like this, but most of the voicing is going to be on the ride from the helmet in the future. But episode 2 is going to have a voiceover, much like this. I hope that you enjoyed it. The rest of this ride is on episode 2. Quick preview. We go over that mountain in front of us. You can see where the road is going up if you look closely. And then we drop down into Taylor Canyon. And I'm going to talk about the Taylor River and Taylor Park a little bit. And we're going to do a little canyon carving. So hope you enjoyed this episode. Episode 2 for the rest of the ride.